Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko. I'm a former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur and the founder of Laborless, which is an immigration tech startup that automates H-1B compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, which brings you, among other things, this show. I know I say this every day, every week, and now I've started to say that I say this every week, but genuinely every week, I'm very excited for these conversations. Our guest today is slightly different. We've talked to a lot of startup founders. We've talked to folks who work at just immigration tech companies, even if they're a little bit more mature. Our guest today, Jeremy Fudge, he's a managing partner at BAL. And BAL, if you don't know, number one, if you're in immigration law, you've certainly heard of BAL. If you haven't, BAL is one of the largest corporate immigration firms in the world, but they're also really, really big tech leader. And they're what they've been building internally and what they've been pushing out externally from the perspective of the importance of technology and immigration is super important and really impactful for the industry. So I'm super excited for this conversation because it's just a slightly different take on how technology impacts immigration and sort of where the world is going. It's one thing to talk to startup founders like myself. We have big visions and dreams, but of course it's a big hill to climb. And it's going to be really exciting to talk to Jeremy and hear what a larger organization like BAL is doing. So without further ado, Jeremy, thank you so much for being here and for joining all the way from Dallas, Texas. I appreciate it. How are you?
I'm great. Glad to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise. For anybody who's watching live, I've got a totally different background today. I'm not in my usual home with my big plant sticking out over my head. But you are, it looks like you're in the office. It looks like you're in your office. So you guys all been kind of going back and working back in the office or remotely? Kind of what's going on over there?
We are on rotations, and kind of most people come in as they need to get something done and take off versus sit here all day long. Some sit here all day long, but we're following society in general with this whole thing, right? And so, we don't put a whole lot of mandates around a lot of it versus just like what makes sense with what's going on with country and vaccines and everything else. So.
It's interesting because we, in the immigration space, especially once things open up, we're going to be really central to this. The industry is going to be really central to this work from anywhere kind of phenomenon that sort of, it is happening, Yeah. And so it's kind of cool to see what the companies that are sort of servicing that industry are also doing themselves. Mm-hmm. But we'll get to all that. So I mention this always, I love to kind of talk about the person, we're going to get to BAL and everything you guys are building and working on. But of course, this show is also about you as the individual, as the person. So I know you've been with BAL for over 14 years, I think, from what I saw. But you went to school, you graduated college, you got a degree in, I think, political science, if I remember correctly. What happened? Well, who was Jeremy before law school, before Jeremy was a lawyer? Where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
Like most people, I was born at a very young age. Start there. That's a terrible dad joke. So I grew up the first 6 years of my life in Alabama, northern Alabama, and we moved to Houston in '82, which was second grade for me. And grew up in Houston then. Had a dad who changed careers midlife. At 40, he went to law school. And he went at night and daytime clerked in a law firm and supported the family that way. And so I saw that was sort of junior high-ish years for me. So I saw him go through law school. I saw him start working as a lawyer. He was that always as a young kid. So I had that kind of in mind a little bit from that. At my church, there was a guy that always hosted the youth group to come over, and he was international lawyer of some sort. And he would always travel to Europe, and he had that humongous satellite dish in his backyard back in the day, right? And had humongous TV back in the day. And I just thought that was so cool, and that's a terrible reason to go to law school. But I thought, man, if I could have a satellite dish like that. So that was kind of that. then I went to Baylor for college, and I majored in journalism and poli-sci. Poli-sci because it felt like what you should do as a pre-law kind of person, and journalism because I actually loved it and wanted to write, and I was on paper in high school and college and all that. So that was where my passion was.
What was it like for you to kind of watch your dad go through? Because I mean, it sounds like he was working a lot. I mean, he's working and then he's going to law school. Yeah. I just think that's so that's really commendable and kind of inspiring to have someone who already has a family go through like a career change like that. Do you? I don't know. How did that impact you at all, or I don't know.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we may go a long time in this conversation thread if you don't pull me out of it. But I mean, the impact my dad had on me was pretty profound. I think he passed away almost 4 years ago now. But he had an amazing life. There's actually a movie made about him. It's called Hell and Mr. Fudge. You can watch it on Prime or something. But he whether you attribute faith, spirituality to it, or whether you say it's just karma or luck or the world colliding or whatever, he's got one of those stories where, this thing leads to this and you don't know it at the time, but then you look back and you go, oh my gosh, that was the connection point, right? So the factual part of it, we believe there's a faith part of it in our family, but the factual part of it is he had gone to seminary to be a pastor, and one event led to another. His father passed away. He moves to Alabama, where they're from, to take over running their bookstore and publishing company. That goes out, weird set of facts, but basically they get bought out and all fired. And so then he's working in a print shop, laying type, like the old school way of laying type, manual labor, kind of, minimum wage job, barely making ends meet for our family. Still kind of preaching on the side, but not officially as a pastor, in that sense, career-wise. He's like, what am I doing? This is ridiculous. I was in higher education a second ago, and now I'm working in a print shop. So he sees an ad and applies to be an editor-in-chief of a newspaper that's starting in Houston called The Good Newspaper. And he ends up getting the job, and we moved to Houston. And he says, why did you pick me out of all the people? And the guy says, well, you had print shop experience, and maybe that would be useful at some point with a newspaper. And so we picked you. So he's like, wow, that's cool. And so then we're in Houston. A couple of years later, the economy bottoms out, and the paper goes under. And so that's when he's like, well, now what am I doing? I'm in Houston, and what the heck am I going to do? And so he goes to law school. People in our church said, you'd be a good lawyer. So he goes to law school. He did that for a number of years, doing plaintiff's personal injury litigation work stuff. Ends up working for a great guy named Mark Lanier. He's a huge plaintiff's lawyer. And a little ways into that, Mark says, hey, why don't you just, focus on ministry stuff again? That was your passion originally, and I'll sponsor, in essence, you through the law firm, kind of deal. So, wow. So he ends up doing his, ministry stuff at the end of his life again that he started wanting to do originally. But the point of all that is he was never someone who was fixated on career as identity and career as something more than maybe it should be, in a sense, for people versus, you want to provide for your family, number one. And number two, you want to be pursuing your passions, and you want to be finding ways to make impact in people's lives. And I think that's the lesson that came through to me so loud and clear over all those years of growing up under him. I now, put out in my own version of it with what I'm doing. So,
wow, that's really powerful. It's cool too that he kind of went back to something that he was doing earlier. Like that was clearly something he was doing throughout his life, and I'm sure his first of all, his studies at seminary and probably the work that he did, even as a kind of a part-time preacher or minister, impacted his career as an attorney. I mean, you're public speaking, you're convincing people, you're empathizing with people. It's so fascinating. Like I look back at my life, and I did 10 years of improv, and, at the time it was just fun. But to your point, you look back and you can connect the dots so clearly and say these three things that felt totally unrelated at the time made me who I am, or propelled me forward. So, and, it's cool too that you kind of saw that as a teenager, because to your point, if he had already been doing all of this when you were born, at the early age of your birth, you probably would have I think we naturally just take things like that for granted because that's how life is, right?
Right.
So it's kind of cool to have experienced that. I suppose it's really
Mm-hmm.
powerful. Did you when you went to college? Did you ever think about studying, like being a journalist, or was it like, I love to do this, but I'm definitely going to be a lawyer? You know, my father became a lawyer, and I want to kind of follow in those footsteps.
I definitely knew I wanted to write in some form or fashion always. But I didn't want to be a journalist, frankly, because it seemed like a hard career and paid poorly. So I kind of ruled that, and being a professional musician, I ruled out. Like, I love playing music and I can play a lot of things, but it's one in a million or more, right? That you're going to hit it and actually be able to pay your mortgage and raise kids and stuff, right? So, so there was the practical side of me always, I think, that came out.
Interesting. Did you, and then so you graduated college. I'm curious, did you ever have, like, I asked this a lot because a lot of my guests are kind of founders of their CEOs or founders of tech companies.
Mm-hmm.
You're in leadership at a big firm, but of course you're not like the founder of a startup. But you are more kind of an intrapreneur. So I wonder though, did you ever have like sort of, an entrepreneurial instinct, the desire to like start something or lead something of your own when you were younger?
It's funny. I think it's probably true for everyone if you allow yourself to do this, but I never set foot in the business school at Baylor. One day, one course, nothing. I didn't think, my dad was not a business person really. I didn't think that was in my DNA at all. And we can get to it later if you want to, but like when I became managing partner here, that was a quick crash course with our CFO, Don, and other people, like, okay, I don't know what a balance sheet is, right? I don't know what a profit and loss statement is, right? So, learning business. And then as that's gone and I've dreamed and I've gotten comfortable in the business world, and even outside of my law stuff at BAL, being an angel investor in other companies and being able to be part of that whole process. And I've discovered that I am in fact quite entrepreneurial and have this business bent to me that I didn't even know existed until much later, after practicing many years of law.
That's cool. Yeah, my first entrepreneurial endeavor was starting a student group in law school. And it was just the moment of like, wait, I can just create something that I want to exist in the world. If it's not there, no one, if I want to, I can do it. It was really interesting. It's interesting, like how we stumble upon these things, and when in life. I'm always really kind of, I think, fascinated by people who, when they were, 5 or 6, they were like hustling basketball cards. And then like by 7, they had a team of 6-year-olds that were hustling basketball cards. Like when I hear about people like that, it's so, it is what it is. Everyone gets there, if they ever get there at their own time, but it's always just so cool to hear that.
Yeah. I think we tend to let others or let our own brain predefine who we are a lot. Right. And I think that the challenge everyone faces is, how do you fight against those assumed constraints? How do you fight against whatever the world's telling you? And how do you really discover who you really are? And once you do that, man, the world just opens up to adventure and excitement and fun. Right. And I think that's sort of, in a sense, that's the mission I'm trying to put into what we do here, even though it's a law firm where it's, whatever. If you're not doing that, you're missing life, right? That's getting way deep, but I think that's true, right? I really do.
I definitely agree with that. So before we kind of go keep going, I just a shout out to everyone who's watching. Let us know where you're watching in from, and like tell us if you're from BAL. Shout out the office you're at or what city you're in. And then of course, obviously, wherever you are in the US or in the world, let us know. I'd love to just do some shout outs here. So we do have a comment here or a question here from Grace Co. Will this interview be recorded? Grace, I think it looks like you're coming in from YouTube. So yes, it will be recorded. It will be on YouTube. We also have somebody, I can't see with your privacy. I don't know who you are, but you're saying the best, Jeremy. So Thank you for that. So, all right. So you went to law school, you graduated law school, and you obviously you got a job right away, which is great. Did you start in immigration, or did you start doing something else? And like, because I'm curious about that journey to the immigration world.
It's a great story. It's one of my dot connecting stories. So I grew up a big fan of U2, the band, and all the way back to like Unforgettable Fire, 1985, like junior high, and even maybe about junior high. So I was in law school at UT, and that's Texas, not Tennessee. And I was recruiting, going through summer, recruiting for summer internships. And I was at a happy hour for one of the firms called Jenkins and Gilchrist, and started talking to this guy named Brian Graham. Shout out to Brian if he ever hears this. And so we start talking. He plays guitar, I play guitar, drums, other stuff. We're kind of hitting it off conversationally. And we start talking about U2. He loves U2. I love U2. We start talking about U2. And he's like, hey, I work in immigration. You should clerk this summer for a couple of weeks with us in immigration. I'm like, what the heck is immigration? I've never even heard of that, right? Because I hadn't. And he tells me what it is. And back then, you clerked at two firms, and you clerked in two sections for each firm. So I had 4 sections to play with. And I was like, I could be a quarter of my summer. So I did, just kind of went on a limb. So summer came, went and worked for him. Loved it. I think if I remember right, I worked on like an extraordinary ability case for my project for 2 or 3, 4 weeks, whatever it was. That's all I did. And so kind of liked it, thought it was cool, different. I want to say it was a Formula One driver, maybe, or a golfer. I can't remember, but it was like kind of cool and sexy. And this is a professional athlete. And so then I went back to UT, and they had one class in immigration, a con law, really influenced class on immigration, Professor Kurgan, and I took that. I think I got an A in it, and felt like, this is a possibility, but it was like, man, I just don't know. And I really want to put all my eggs in this one basket that seems very speculative. And is there really a career in immigration? And so I chickened out, basically, and I took a job at another firm called Jackson Walker in litigation. That was easy. Lots of people go to litigation. Dad did litigation, right? So joined, and my first day there, they said, hey, we have a little bit of immigration work that our clients have from time to time. And the guy that was doing it just left, which ironically, again, life's small circles, was Lyndon Melmed, who now runs our government relations in Washington. Wow. So Lyndon had just left to join another large firm. And so I was like, yeah, I'll dabble in it if it's just dabbling, right? But I got my career in litigation. So started out, and it was a great experience. One I wish more people had here, where I had to learn everything from scratch, from the basics, right? So I'm pulling the regs and reading them myself. I'm pulling interpreter releases and Gordon Melman books and, the Blue Frag books and, like all the sources themselves, and learning how to do it. And I reported for immigration work. I reported to a partner who was a tax partner and didn't know anything about immigration, really. And so he would say, hey, so-and-so partner just called. They want to do an H-1B. Go research and write me a memo about what an H-1B is and what we need to do. And so, like, it's crazy to think about in today's world. But, so I would like to do exhaustive research to learn that visa type, write him a memo, and he'd be like, great, let's do it. His name was Willie Hornberger. He was a great mentor. And, he'd pull out a wood ruler, and he would go line by line through the forms with me, checking everything. I mean, it was just crazy. And we billed hourly, nuts. Anyway, so it was unique. Not many people have that opportunity to learn that way. And, reaching out to Ayla mentor people. And I called Brian back at Jenkins and, all that sort of thing. So that all went on for about a year and a half, and it escalated to where more and more immigration work was coming. I hired a paralegal or two. I hired another attorney even at the end. And I was phasing out of litigation, which I've quickly learned I didn't like. I'm not wired that way. Like, to fight when you know that you're offering 0 and they're wanting $1 million, and you know you're going to settle 500,000, like I just want to settle and be done, right? But that's not how litigation is. So I was like, oh, this is not for me. So grew in the immigration, loved it more and more. Still seemed, I don't know, but I feel like I love this thing. So I walked into I called Brian back at Jenkins and I said, hey, you remember me? And he's, yeah, well, we're hiring. Great. I want to come. So I interviewed, got a job there. So then I walked into the litigation head's office and said, hey, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go do immigration full time. And he was like, you're crazy. That's no way to build a career. You're not going to make any money, all this kind of stuff, and I'm like, okay. And so anyway, I went to Jenkins and joined that group, which at the time was Harry Joe and Steve Laddick and Sean Orm were the 3 partners over that group at Jenkins. That was 2002, and was there 5 years, basically, 2007. Jenkins, in a weird deal, ended up having to settle a dispute with the government, DOJ, and the part of the settlement was they would shut the firm down and go out of business. So our group knew that at the end of 2006, and so we're like, where are we going to go? And so Steve and Sean knew Warren and Jeff and David at BAL from ALA stuff, and so we left and we created the Texas offices by joining BAL. We had 38 people in Dallas and we had 2 in Houston, February 2007.
Wow.
But it all started with you two.
There's so many lessons to pull from there. Number one, and I suspect this is something that you might kind of agree with, but the idea of, going to a networking event and talking to somebody and not feeling like all you have to do is sort of sell yourself as a prospective law student, but talk about the bands you like, the instruments you play, how powerful that sort of connection is early in your career too, not just when you're, comfortable as an established, partner or whatever, but even as a law student. I mean, you're still a person. So I love that story because I try to play by that same kind of rule as much as possible. I'm curious though, when you started, I mean, it sounds like you kind of just learned immigration by doing, like you right? I mean, is that right?
Yeah, totally. And I learned it. I mean, I really did. I can still quote regs to you, book, chapter, verse, right? Like, because I had to, and I didn't have people around me at all, really.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, knowing the memos that were out there, and the virtue memo this time, and this memo over here, and I really learned it. And for better or worse, probably mostly worse, at BAL, for example, when you get hired, like you're thrown into the fire pretty quick, right? You're not getting to sit there and just learn while billing clients. I mean, again, we billed hourly. I mean, H-1Bs would be like $20,000. I mean, it was just crazy in today's concepts. But I was learning.
Wow. I want to give a little bit of just take a pause just to give people some love. So we got Kip Welch saying, loving the dad jokes.
It's terrible.
We have somebody from Bogota, Colombia. So thank you for joining.
Love that.
Gita, also from Dallas, Texas. Gabby Nieto from Dallas.
Love it.
Someone else maybe from Bogota, or maybe the same person. We got Robin from Dallas. You're very popular.
Robin goes way back here.
That's awesome. Justin Paul from San Francisco. Carl Sutton from the
a lot of BAL love going on right there.
I know. I love it. In Colorado, where I wish I could live because the mountains are beautiful. Elaine from Austin. We got Kate from Dallas. Go, Jeremy. We have Dave from Denver, Colorado. So just want to give a shout out to all the folks joining. And we got someone else from Chicago. I don't know why it says LinkedIn user. It might be some privacy settings because we're live, but I love seeing all these people joining from so many places. That's super cool. Wow. So you built up this immigration practice, then you left to go to your old firm where you actually were introduced to immigration as a law student.
Yeah.
And then what you were saying is, as it kind of progressed, that firm, I guess, dissipated, and you effectively collectively went and joined BAL in 2007. Mm-hmm. Right. In 2007. So I think this is actually a perfect transition because when it comes to BAL, I mean, the firm had already been established for quite some time. Can you kind of backtrack a little bit just from that perspective and just share a little bit about kind of BAL before you joined, and sort of, because the reason I'm asking this is because I'm kind of trying to understand. I mean, you were a pretty decently sized team that, joining in 2007. What was BAL at that time? Like, how did it get to where they said, yeah, we'll take this on and just boom, expand in Dallas?
Yeah, the firm started in 1980 in San Francisco, and it was Jeff Appelman and David Barry. I'm sitting in our history room. I don't know if it's appropriate to like tour you, but like right over here is where the history starts. And I'll even read you the first part. It says Jeff Appelman, attorney at law, and David Barry, attorney at law, opened for business in 77 and 78, respectively. On October 13, 1980, the one-man firm became a partnership. The decision to be named Barry and Appelman or Appelman and Barry came down to a coin flip. David got the name and Jeff got the larger office. So it's a great story, and it goes all the way around, literally. But yeah, the firm started out there. Jeff and David were doing all kinds of immigration at the time. They did some corporate. They did a whole lot more family. They did asylum. They were doing a lot. That was when, that's right over here on the history wall. That's Dave and Jeff represent hundreds of religious refugees fleeing Iran as the Shah lost power. So, like they were doing some really cool stuff. They had the seminal case at the time, a guy named Carl Hill, who was a homosexual coming from England and got put in deportation because that was on the list of public health psychopathic personality things at the time in immigration law. And so they fought that case and they ended up winning. And that was actually a huge win for gay rights at the time, and even led to everything else. And so they did some really cool stuff in all aspects of immigration. As they got sort of into the 90s, the firm, they decided to shift more towards corporate immigration. And 97, 96, Warren Leiden joined. He had been the executive director of ALA for 14 years or so. And he joined, and he kind of brought more of a business mindset to the whole deal. Around the same time, a client said, a big corporate client said, we will hire you in an RFP probably, but you've got to build a database for us. And so our very first database was rolled out in 97. I could even show you a screenshot of it over here on the wall, but it's just crazy to look at, but it's, that's when we started the tech journey too, right? And so that was 97. So 10 years later, 07 is when we're coming along. There was about 150 people in the San Francisco office, and there was about 10 in the Tyson's, Virginia office area. So there's about 160 existing BL folks, and then we were about 38 Dallas, 2 Houston. So, we thought of it as a merger versus an acquisition. And the firm had 10 years of tech development under its belt. Looking at it today, obviously we sort of chuckle at some of the screenshots of what it was and all that, but it was part of the DNA even back then. How do we build efficiencies into things? How do we, apply technology to things? How do we stay abreast of current, technological innovations? But always built, and it always had that thread running through from Jeff and David at the very beginning days of, we're here to help people, right? Like that's what this is about. And, I think within ALA, the bar at large, people that do family-based immigration tend to kind of go, corporate, you're kind of sold out a little bit. You're not really like helping people as much. But I just think that's ridiculous. And what we do for sure, at least, is, we are helping people in our immigration work, period, right? The fact that a company has hired us or paying our bill or signed a contract with us or whatever isn't really relevant to the fact that we're still helping people day in, day out. And so, our mission statement, for example, is provide an experience that makes a positive difference in people's lives. And so whether you're a paralegal or attorney working with a foreign national, you're making a positive difference in someone's life, right? They're super stressed, anxious, going through this process, moving, getting new jobs, whatever it is. You're bringing something to that, right? If you're working with the corporate person, the company person, HR, they want to build a program, right? So it's a different service, but you're still helping people, right? If you're in tech or marketing or any of our other functions here, you're helping people internally and externally sometimes, but internally, right? And you have a chance to make positive. So it's always about people, no matter what your job, no matter how big we are, no matter how glossy our, LinkedIn video is or whatever. Like, it's still at the core. It's what Jeff and David started. It's about helping people, and that's why people join, right? In immigration generally, a lot of times is I want to help people. I want to make a difference, and this is a great place to do it.
I want to echo the sentiment of corporate immigration also definitely helping people because, we'll get to this shortly, but one of the reasons that I went into the tech space is because the thing that I enjoyed more when I practiced, and I probably spent it in way too much time on the phone with clients, but my favorite thing to do, of course, was to talk to the foreign nationals. Unfortunately, because they were usually stressed out, but it was just so rewarding to be able to brainstorm, and I never rushed them off the phone. And I always made sure that by the time we got off the phone, not that I necessarily had an answer for them. Very often there is no answer. You're waiting or you're, but at least you made them feel heard and you made them feel better. And absolutely, like they're moving sometimes with their families, with their small children, and that's a whole nother, piece of the puzzle. So, I think at the very core of it, I 100% agree with that. I wanted to also ask you a question. So, you guys built your first database in 1997. In 2007, you mentioned you already had 10 years of tech within the firm. But you built the initial database for a client, it sounds like. Yeah. Do you know, I know this was obviously 10 years before you joined, but do you know if there was always this idea of like, maybe we can use this for other clients and like kind of roll it out firm wide, or, was it kind of a natural journey towards that? I'm kind of curious how it progressed internally.
Yeah, I think from what I understand, I think that was always sort of the thought. Once it was like, hey, we got to do this for this client, then the thought was, how do we use it for everybody? And I think that was pretty instant. And a lot of that probably was from Warren because he was just bringing that business savvy from ALA over here. But it was, it's a crazy deal because it was a lawyer, one of our attorneys who built the first, it was a Microsoft Access database. He built it. He was the first IT guy. And then the next couple iterations of it over the years, oh, that's me, I think, right? I'm back.
You're back.
David Whitmark is paralegal, learned how to code at night because it was the late 90s and people were learning how to code, right? Because that was the future. And he built the next several versions of our system himself as well. And it wasn't really till we got to 2000, it's handy being in a history room right now. It wasn't really till we got to like 2014 that we had our first version of Cobalt built by professionals, in a sense. So it's crazy.
Wow. Man, that's so cool. I also love that you had someone internally who just kind of, whipped something up. I mean, you had to for the client. That's super cool. It's also really, I think there's so much foresight there for that particular client to say, hey, this computer thing, we want you to use it too, right? Yeah. And the firm, the partners said, yeah, let's do it, right? I mean, how many firms are like, yeah, I don't know, I don't want to touch that. We're not technology people, you know what I mean? And like, there's got to be some level of just risk taking and entrepreneurial spirit there to for a law firm in 97. Forget about today. This is 1997 to say, as far as I know, computers are used by, not law firms. Let's just put it that way, but we'll, so that's super cool. Just the incredible foresight there. So I want to get to kind of, you joined in 2007, you had this merger with your group and BAL. And of course now the firm grew, I mean, a good like 25%, it sounds like, or relatively large number. So sort of how did you said you guys built Cobalt internally in 2014, so that's another 7 years. Can you just talk a little bit about internally what are the conversations that you were having throughout that time? I mean, you're clearly seeing value in technology, right? But you're still a law firm, let's be honest, right? So how do you kind of start shifting maybe the mindset, or maybe it was already going in that direction, you accelerated it? Like, What were some of the discussions internally? Because now, we look at BAL now and it's like, oh yeah, well, you guys, you talk about you're partnering with UiPath. You guys use UiPath, a really big company that's doing really great stuff. There's just a lot under the hood at BAL.
Yeah.
How did you get there internally?
I think it's two things. One is what you're identifying. There was a spirit in the firm from Jeff David Warren, 97, forward, of willingness to embrace it and willingness to say, how can we adopt this and put it to use in the practice, and how does it enhance the practice? There's a lot of talk these days about AI in general in the world, right? About AI and is it going to take jobs and all this kind of stuff. And I think they never had that fear even back then of it. This isn't meant to replace anything. This is meant to enhance what we do. That was always the mindset. And so I think they, if you look at the technology, that I'm looking at on these walls in front of me, it's enhancements as it goes forward. So the first thing was just a database, for example, instead of index cards, right? And then there was a bolt-on that was a web-based facing place where they could log in and see their status. That was like the next year. And then it iterates further to where they start using tags, where the form letter will spit out and it'll have certain information from the database in the letter already, right? And so it's just iterations and iterations and iterations, leading to 14 with Cobalt. I took over for Warren in 13. He retired and tapped me to take over. So I took over then, and probably because of some of how I was raised and my dad and all that we've talked about, I never really had a real strong identity in like, I'm a lawyer kind of thing. Some people are that way, right? And that's great. I'm not knocking it, but I never attached a lot of stuff to that. I always was sort of like, I'm just trying to do really great work, whatever the work is, and I want to achieve. I want to do something right with life. And so I think I've probably put the bent on us since 2013 more and more of, we're a business. We're not just a law firm, we're a business. And that means this, right? And you go through a whole bunch of lenses of that. The bar for me never was what's anyone competitively in our space doing. It was never even what are law firms doing, right? When we talked about customer service, remember I gave a talk at one of our leadership retreats in 2013, and I talked about the bar is not other law firms. The bar for customer service is like Ritz-Carlton, USAA, right? Like companies that are great at customer service. That's our bar. And I went through, all our different departments and functions and said, these are our bars in other areas, right? And so I think through that lens, we've crystallized technology of the bar is not immigration tech. The bar is, to use the one everyone uses, TurboTax, right? The bar is these other kinds of technologies that are out there. And, with the way society has gone, in terms of technology in the last just handful of years with RPA and AI and machine learning and all these things, right? We're like kids in a candy store with it. We're like, how do we use this? How do we enhance the practice, not get rid of people, but how do we enhance the practice? And that's, that enablement, both in spirit and in dollars, has allowed our CIO, Vince Damasio, and his team just to, say, let's go, right? That phrase behind me on this wall, how you pursue the exceptional, comes from our mantra, which is pursue the exceptional. And that's the spirit that drives everything. Like, how do we pursue the exceptional technology? Well, here's all these things that are happening. How do we embrace them, right? How do they work in our practice?
That's cool. I love the idea that you're saying to yourself, we're a business. We're not just a law firm. I talk
by that, right? I know there's lawyers that are gonna be like,
but you know what? But I disagree, because I disagree with them, right? Because if you're a solo, right, and there's some of the most passionate advocates very often you find are solos, and they know everything. They know the law, the statutes front to back. They still have to pay the bills, right? You got to pay rent. They have a team. They have to do you get life insurance? Do you give them a 401k? Like, you don't learn that in law school. They don't even touch anything close to that in law school, right? And so I think in a way, I mean, and this is a whole different conversation about how law school is not quite really preparing us for going out there and, past first 3 years, they're not preparing us at all. And there are a lot of people who come out and they start practices right away and they spend most of their time figuring out how to run the business. So I think we have to think about law as a business. I think it's okay to say that some lawyers within the firm will gravitate to, if they're a bunch of people, they'll gravitate to really focusing on growing the business and maybe won't touch the casework as much. Other lawyers are just the genius lawyer that knows, and you don't want them touching the business, right? But at least they know the business is taken care of by someone else. So, I mean, I totally agree with that. I think one of the challenges, you guys are building technology internally. Me as a technology, like as a provider, when I talk to law firms, some of the challenges is that they just don't, I think sometimes they don't see themselves as a business. So they don't see how technology might fit in. It feels like a nuisance rather than what you're saying, which is to say, look, there's all this cool tech that's being built in other industries. How do we take that and sort of make what we do better, right? How do we automate some of the tasks that frankly, nobody wants to go in and do? They just have to because it's part of work.
And it's all in that spirit of like, how do you make a bigger impact? How do you serve people better, right? You look at Amazon as a simple, easy example, right? And it's like, well, I could go to the bookstore, and some people love that part of the process, right? But I could go to a bookstore, I could look at a book, right, and pick out one and buy it and then drive home, right? Versus I can hit one button and have a book on my door the next day, right? Or even Audible or something, right? Like, you're making the service better. You're serving people better. You're helping people, right, through technology. And that creates, frankly, other jobs that didn't exist beyond the regular jobs you had in the first place. So
that's right. That's right. And I think it means that law firms in the future will employ people that today they don't even think about as employees. And the flip side is there's some people who are doing things today that we won't need them to do anymore, like a complete file clerk. Right. Yeah. Like if you're doing everything online, it's really interesting. You mentioned Audible. It made me think about if we're using Amazon as an example of, digitizing a manual experience. You can order a physical book on Amazon, or you can have that same experience delivered in a totally virtual fashion. And in my head, I was like, what could that mean for immigration law? It's one thing to say, well, digitize your connection to a human attorney, but maybe you can go a step further and say, well, for these 10 things, you actually don't need a human attorney at all. Here's, you know what I mean? And so, but you got to know what's happening. You need to know, well, what is Audible? How did Audible evolve from the experience of a bookstore, and how can we parallel that, journey sort of in our industry? So, yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I love this topic because I think it feels like a lot of people feel this way, but then when you go out into the world, you recognize that a lot of attorneys and just other people in our industry, they don't feel this way and they don't think this way, and it's so foreign to them. And so I always beat this drum, and so I'm happy. Thank you for beating the drum with me, because I think the more we talk about it, the more we put it out into the world, the more the industry will embrace, technology and innovation.
And you got to embrace it, honestly, because both, I think you have a moral imperative almost to embrace it because you're going to be able to help more people, and two, you're going to get left behind in a business reality, right? Like, you're going to get left behind, and so, especially in this current immigration tech environment we're in, right? Like, you can't sit by and rest right now. Like, there's too many other people coming in with money, right? Like,
yep. Before we because I have a really burning question that I want to ask you that I think hopefully folks will be really interested in. But before we do that, we've got Bojan saying hello. So, hey, Bojan. We have Brenda from Dallas, Texas. We have Cassandra from Houston. Go, Jeremy. We've got Don from Dallas. Bojan was saying some really cool stuff. Many join to work in immigration because it is, you are making a difference in people's lives. So very cool. Watching from Chicagoland. Thank you, Ann.
By the way, he gets, just to give him a shout out publicly, he gets so many positive raving survey feedbacks from clients. He's excellent at client survey.
That's awesome. I love that. And surveying, that's also something not everyone does. I don't
know how you operate without it, honestly.
Patty, give a shout out to Vince. Thank you, Patty. Alejandra from San Francisco. A lot of comments. So Neelima says BAL is progressing towards the right direction. She
BAL.
interviewed at BAL and didn't know that they're not a typical law firm. Sorry, yeah.
I'm correcting you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Neelima. I don't get why lawyers have to be so formal. I totally agree with you. I mean, I don't practice anymore, and I'll always put that out there. But I was day one. I was like, I do not want to wear a suit. Why be comfortable? My clients will never come into my office and see me. Why? So I totally agree. So it was funny because when I was looking at your picture on the BAL website, it's like you with kind of your t-shirt and jeans and your hands tucked in. Yeah, yes, there you go. Exactly. And so I was like, that's cool. It feels, people might think it's silly, but it's signaling something, even if it's subconscious about you, about, the practice. So I think lawyers should do that more. I mean, it's great in terms of, attracting great employees. But if you're talking about, we have to remember that we take for granted when we work in the legal practice that everyone's comfortable with lawyers. I still, to this day, there are people who reach out to me, and I don't practice. I have not practiced immigration law for about 5 years, and people still reach out to me and say, "Hey, Roman, you're the only immigration lawyer I know. Can we talk? I have a question," right? And I usually will talk, and then I'll maybe, but these people, they're like nervous to talk to me because I'm a lawyer, and I'm like, guys, it's just me. I got a t-shirt. I got holes in my socks. You know what I mean? Like, come on, it's just me. But so I think putting out this image is super important.
Yeah. The dirty little secret is I stole a cue from President Obama, and I have like 10 of this exact same V-neck from Old Navy, and this is what I wear every day. It's just easier. You just throw it on, you're done. Don't think about it.
Yep, agreed. Maria says, "Go, Jeremy!" Watching
so many great BAL people.
I know.
I love it.
Neelima says, "Simplicity is the game," and then Russ from Dallas started wearing button-downs and slacks until you called it formal wear. That's so funny. We've got also Syed from Cleveland, Ohio. So thank you, everybody. Please keep showing the love. So, okay, I want to move on to this burning question. I know we have a lot of BAL folks, so they probably know the answer. But for everyone here who's watching and listening, who's not, obviously at the firm, can you talk a little bit about what is your tech? We talk there, you put out the marketing, we know about Cobalt, there's been press releases and things like that. But, from what you can share, like, can you give a sneak peek of sort of what is under the hood? What does BAL do? What kind of service do you guys provide from a tech perspective, to your clients, to your employees? Like, what can people, I guess, aspire to in a way?
Yeah. Let me think of how to do that. So I'll walk you through. Maybe we walk through a case. That'll be a framework to use. So the system, Cobalt, that platform, drives the whole workflow of the case. It's not too dissimilar in core functions from Zoom or Tracker, if Tracker still exists, or any of the off-the-shelf stuff. In the sense of, there's an online questionnaire, right? They're going to fill it out. It comes into the system. It's populating. Different than, I think, the off-the-shelf stuff, a workflow engine. And so it's driving a case forward. So, for example, let's say you skip to the end of the case. You get done with the case. You click filed. It's going to fire off an email automatically to the person that says, "Hey, we filed your case, and here's all this information about blah, blah, blah," right? So there's a workflow engine that's driving the whole thing. So you got some of that same core functionality in all of that. Secure messaging is built into it, and so you can, just like your bank, you can send securely rather than clear text email and all that kind of stuff. Like, you can send securely documents or information or whatever it might be. So Cobalt's kind of that engine driving all of that. Then you've got, back up from filed, you got case prep part of it. We have a technology called DocGen, document generation, DocGen. Someone once dressed up at Halloween at our contest as DocGen, like a doctor. Kind of funny, but their name was Jen. So DocGen has a lot of RPA in it. And so what it's doing is, from that foundation I talked about where you had just data tags in a mail merge sort of technology, it's that, but just today's version, and so you click a button, DocGen button, and it will generate all the forms, all the support letters, all the emails that are standard milestone emails of the whole case. It generates the entire package suite. And then you can check that, obviously, and make sure it's how you want it. But it's doing a lot of prep in that sense. So we've got DocGen kind of in the case prep mode. Client satisfaction survey is a separate system that bolts to it in a sense. And that, like I said, that's the lifeblood of any organization, honestly, if you're doing it right. It's, that's your continuous feedback loop. And so that's coming in and going to our operational excellence department, and they're, giving us analysis and feedback on all that. And I read every one of the surveys that come in because that's my pulse check on our clients, right? So you got that going on. You've got in the firm, you've got RPA and some of that kind of stuff going on in lots of other departments, like something like simple like canceling checks in our finance department. That was like a massive number of hours, tens of thousands or something of hours being spent dealing with canceled checks, and you're going to avoid this one and all this kind of stuff, right? And so we applied a RPA to that, built a bot for it. Now it just does it in 10 seconds, right? That kind of deal. So there's lots of implementations of RPA through the firm's operations that way. And then you've got Ellie, our chatbot. They haven't really pushed that to the edge yet, but that's there. We've got an app that's in beta in the App Store and the Android store right now called TrueTime, Case TrueTime, and it's about processing times for immigration for different cases. That's about to be launched out via our tech company, which is a separate spin-out company, very soon. We've got machine learning and AI kind of in use, through OCR. And so, for example, we can put a receipt notice or approval notice on a scanner. It's going to populate the database with everything on that thing. It's going to put it in the right place, saved in the right place, etc. You can similarly put, this is where it gets pretty cool. You can put a RFE, right? Because immigration's issuing RFEs with boilerplate paragraphs, right? And they just pick and choose which paragraphs they want. So you pop that thing on a scanner, it can read that and identify these are the paragraphs, and then it can identify, well, these are our standard responses or their standard arguments, and create a first draft of an RFE response without, a human involved in that at all.
Wow.
Sort of anywhere and everywhere we can look and see, how can we put a bot to that? I mean, that's kind of the phrase around here, right? Like, how can we put a bot to that? Then we figure out, can we, and do we, and there we go. I'm probably forgetting a few things here and there, but that's sort of the overall landscape of things. Then we've got things like Advisor. Advisor's a knowledge management tool. And there's about to be some iterations on that are really cool in our 5-year plan. Something you said earlier made me think of technology and developing and all that, but really in that spirit of like, how do you necessarily need a lawyer in all cases? Or different version of the question would be, how do you customize content delivery for people, right? Do you want to read this? Do you want to watch it? Do you want to talk to someone about it? Same thing with like questions during the middle of a case, right? Do you want to talk? I don't want to call Amazon and talk to a human. I want to go on and find an answer, or I want to chat with someone or whatever, right? And so how do you serve up experiences that are more customized to how people learn or how they want to receive it or whatever? And by doing so, you're serving them, more accurately to what their preferences are. So all those things are kind of shaping all of it, automation, bots, all that kind of stuff, service delivery. So
I want to ask you about your journey to this like level of automation, because it's super impressive, of course, but no story is without its downs, So I'm curious, like, well, I suspect, but I'm curious, have you guys had, like, have there been difficulties here? Have there been like you invested into this thing and you're like, you know what, this sucks, it doesn't work, or you invested a lot and then something else came in and that first investment wasn't, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, for sure. I mean, Cobalt V1, let's call it, 2014 thing. was not a success. It had a lot of problems, and most of them were more in the architecture and the pin test results and things like that than things you see in the surface of it. Like, it looked pretty, but it had some issues, and so we built. In 2017, we launched the complete from scratch rebuild of Cobalt. We wasted tons of money in a sense, millions on that, but it was all part of the process, right? And we're in an agile development methodology here, and so that's part of the agile deal you're signing up for. Is you're going to iterate fast, and it may or may not be right, and you may waste a little money or whatever, but you're going to be able to get to the right answers quicker through trial and error. And that's, it's in that whole mindset. I've talked about this before, I think, on LinkedIn, but like, it's in that mindset of like, don't be afraid to fail. Fail is not fail. Fail is just you learn, right? And you move on and you get to the next thing. So we certainly adopt that in the tech mindset of let's try something and see if it works. And, for a while during last year when we were having all these layoffs, we had a great attorney in our Virginia office, Lynn O'Brien, and she had an idea of how could we create a service basically that would go to people that had been laid off, right? Not clients of ours, but just other people. And how can we serve them? And so we tried to create an online portal for them to come and ask questions and have consultations with us and, all that sort of thing. And we didn't have huge numbers come in through it. So you could look at it and go, that's a failure, but it's not a failure because it created a whole bunch of other systems that now we're using for other things. And we helped some people. So, it's how you look at those things, right?
So I guess the lesson would be if I was an immigration lawyer or firm, thinking about technology, I guess the lesson would be you do have to experiment. To go back to that ethos of your law firm is a business, you have to sort of take some risks. You
do, for sure. And I think the other part of it is I believe, and you'll see more of this in the years to come here, I believe we, BAL, have an obligation to help and to give back to the immigration bar and share technology that we develop and license some of it, share some of it for free, whatever it is. And by doing so, advance our profession and make a bigger impact. We can, if somewhere up in the heavens they're keeping score of good works, right? Like, we can score points by helping other people via other lawyers, right? It doesn't always have to be about us and our lawyers helping people, right? And so I'm a firm believer in that view, and you're going to see more and more of that from us over the next years.
So one of the final questions I'd like to ask guests, or sort of towards the end, is like, what is your vision of immigration technology kind of now and moving forward? Obviously, BAL is kind of helping lead. You're sort of steering the ship, or you're one of the organizations that's certainly steering the ship. So, what do you see for the future of the space? Maybe both within the firm, but also just more generally. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned a couple of things. Like you mentioned, you've done some angel investing and things like that. Like, there's a lot more institutional money going into small immigration tech startups, et cetera. Where do you see the space? Where do you see things going?
I think it's going the way society is going, which is people want customized or personalized experiences with things. People want simple, fast, easy. People want things that make sense holistically within their life, right? You can't come in with a service, immigration or otherwise, that doesn't match up to how they order food or how they order something on Amazon or how they whatever, right? Like, that's jarring. And they're gonna go, what is this? I don't want this, right? And so I think, to your point earlier, you've got to embrace it. It's here. This is the world we live in now. And so I think you'll see some, and we've seen a lot in the last year, right, of PEVC guys coming in and backing different things in our space. You're going to see a lot more of that because the traditional law firms are not doing it, and to their detriment ultimately. But I firmly believe we're going to be on the other side of that coin of where we're helping drive it and we're helping lead it. And, we want to be at the forefront of that as we have been for several decades. So it's fun space.
Just to make a note on that, we got people also just saying, watching from Brooke, watching from Houston, Karen saying about BAL's tech is the best. So proud of BAL. So thank you, everybody.
Miriam's a great story, by the way. We probably don't have time. We're done, I know, but great story of someone who's pursuing the exceptional, not at BAL anymore.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, and thank you, Miriam, for commenting and watching. And I think it's just cool. It goes to show certainly the excitement, because obviously so many people are on and kind of listening, watching, and chiming in, leaving comments. I guess you mentioned there's my question to you is from a global standpoint. I've always had this idea of, I mean, obviously BAL services the world. I mean, you work with companies coming into the U.S. You have a lot of offices around the world, et cetera. I see that U.S. immigration technology, I mean, I think it's kind of like the hub. I mean, there's a lot happening here. Canada is starting to creep up. There's a lot of technology coming out of Canada from an immigration standpoint. But, I've had, for example, Andreas, who's building Visa Right. They're Germany based, right? And they're building a very similar kind of platform, automating the visa, work visa and other kind of permanent residency processes into Germany. And then there's going to hopefully be some expansion perhaps into Europe. And there are other sort of startups creeping up from around the world. I don't know. Do you think that this will be, because I think immigration, of course, is a good industry and it's a pretty big size market in the US, but immigration is by definition global. I mean, if you think about it as a full global market, it's insanely huge. Do you see any of that coming out of the other countries, or, I don't know, how do you feel about that?
I mean, one point of order, just for the record, permanently, is we don't have offices around the world anymore. We sold them all in 2018 to Deloitte UK.
Deloitte, that's right.
We have our alliance with Deloitte. But your point's still valid, which is, maybe it's a little too nationalistic lens that I'm looking at, but I just think America is the leader in a lot of things and will be leading in this space too. Not to say that there won't be other things from other places, but I feel like there's, whether it's the entrepreneurial spirit of America and our society, whether it's the availability of capital, whether it's any of those kinds of things, I think it's coming from here mostly, not exclusively, but mostly. I do think, though, there's a lot of cues to be taken from other countries where their governments are way ahead of ours as far as online filings and all of that, right? And so I think we're looking with Deloitte at how do we build out systems relative to government systems. How do we even partner with governments to, be together, API, otherwise, whatever. And so that's setting a precedent, and some of the companies, that are leading efforts in those areas in other parts of the world, I think will be forerunners in a sense to what we'll end up doing here, hopefully one day, with the USCIS and DOL and so forth. So
it's an interesting point you make. Because on the consumer side, we're definitely leading. I mean, I would agree with you in terms of all the technology platforms and such, but then from the government side, we're not really so it's kind of interesting. We're sort of ready for when the gates open up, we can connect and APIs and such.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's true. That's a little bit out of our control, but there are, I suppose, efforts to talk to the government, especially with the current administration. Maybe they'll be a bit more open or so yeah, it's interesting. That's an interesting kind of dichotomy there between the two.
We're definitely there, at that table trying to have those conversations right now. And, I'm hopeful with some kind of relief, amnesty, whatever that gets passed, hopefully, right, in this administration, DACA, all that kind of stuff, where we've got to have an automated system for that stuff, right? Like if that's a paper-based system with the millions of people that are out there that would be going through it, that's going to be terrible for everybody involved.
Including the government employees.
Yeah.
I guess the last question maybe that I'd ask you, and the last sort of serious, if you will, question is, what would you say for other immigration law owners, whether they're solo or small firm or maybe a growing firm, what would be kind of your, I suppose, advice maybe that you've picked up along the way, whether it's from anything you've learned from your father or or just maybe from your practice. Because I feel like people, will listen, and I can try to share whatever wisdom I suppose I have, but if I haven't been in the trenches for 20 years, it can only go so far. So I'm curious, kind of what are your thoughts for folks like, hey, you want to stay in business, you want to continue to grow your practice and impact people, think about this.
I think there's probably two things. One is about yourself, and it's simple stuff. Be humble, be kind, know what you're grounded in, know what you believe, know who you are, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, know when you're, thriving or declining on either side of those things. I think that's critically important to achieve any kind of other success in life. I think the second is, steal our phrase, pursue the exceptional. Like, don't limit yourself like we've talked about today. Don't put artificial constraints around yourself. Don't say, well, I'm not this, so I can never be this or whatever. Life's too short for that. And the impact we can make in the world is too big to miss. And so, break out of those things, starting with the first step of knowing yourself, but break out of that mindset and just dream big and say, where could I be in 10 years? Right. And, you look at anyone that's written, great American novels, for example, and they don't sit down in a blank screen on a, iPad or whatever and be like, I'm going to write a 200-page book today. Right. They sit down and they go, I'm going to write 1,000 words today. And that's it. That's all I got to do today. Right. And so it's lining up your dominoes to that huge domino at the end, but you start with just very small things each day and be disciplined and diligent. And, I eat 5 eggs every morning and I wear the same shirt every day. It's very boring, but it leads to a greater life, right? Because it allows me to be healthy. It allows me to save time, right? Like it's simple things. And I think sometimes we just overcomplicate life and everything else involved with life. And it comes down, always to me, to simple principles, simple things that frankly you probably knew as a kid growing up.
Yeah, I love that. I've always been a t-shirt person, but I have different t-shirts, and you're making me think that I should definitely just buy the one t-shirt 10, 15 times. I love that. That's awesome. So I do want to, before I let you go, I do want to ask, so you mentioned you play a bunch of instruments. What instruments do you play? And if you have a favorite, what would it be?
My primary and first instrument was the drums. I played in lots of bands in junior high and high school and college. Got paid, so I guess I've been a professional musician technically.
Wow.
And so that was my primary, and I would still pick that if I'm in, joining a band and we're picking instruments. I learned by being in bands. I learned how to play guitar. I learned how to play bass. I learned how to sort of play keyboard. I can do other random instruments here and there, but these days it's a lot easier and simpler to pick up a guitar and just strum in my room than it is get on the drum set. But I do have a drum set in my house still, and sometimes we've had parties here at BAL. I've played drums, at parties and things. So it's fun.
That's super cool. I love it. Yeah, I was going to ask if there's a BAL band.
Unofficially.
Yeah. Well, listen, worst case scenario, if something happens to the firm, there's your career change right there. Career number 2.
Yeah.
I love it. Cool. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much. This has been really fascinating. I've definitely learned a lot. In terms of the firm and the history and everything y'all have done there. But hopefully for folks listening, they'll get some inspiration out of it and just not feel that they can't take those steps, right? Not feel that they can't experiment and maybe lose a little money along the way, but there's a learning process there. And, if you're in a position to invest in making your firm better and your experience for your clients better, I say go for it. So thank you so much. This was really awesome. And thank you for giving your time and for sharing your story.
Enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And for everyone who's joined throughout this hour and commented and left wonderful notes, thank you all so much too. Definitely goes to show that the BAL team is definitely rooting not just for Jeremy, but just for the firm and for y'all, for one another. So really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. as always, I don't really have much to say. I mean, it's just a great conversation, and I'm really excited for, I guess, the future. I think every time I get off these conversations, I'm excited for the future of our industry. But it's certainly, and I said this in the beginning, it's certainly cool to listen to a startup, because we're essentially naive as organizations. But I think talking to Jeremy and listening to what BAL is working on makes me feel like, okay, cool. The industry is actually moving in the right direction. It's not just me in my room thinking up crazy things. So I'm very excited about that. So thank you all for joining. Appreciate you listening. We'll be back next week, as always, with another interview. In the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, and peace out.